Oh, I can't help to say that he looks kind of like your little chalk totem guy. And he was just,
We
It's
thought about
perfect.
chalk as a name,
Oh,
but it doesn't sound right. You can't like.
But the black and the white and the red just fits perfectly.
yeah.
It's all alchemical.
Well, today we are discussing the Two of Pentacles. In this deck, it's the Two of Stones. And in the Rider-Waite, it's this juggler, Two of Pentacles. So,
Do you want to take a quick look at the Thoth?
yes, it's like change, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mhm.
Symbol has been coming up a lot for me lately, the infinity symbol.
Interesting. So, Rebecca, if it's been coming up for you recently, are there any sort of contemplations or things it's brought up as far as its message there?
Well, it's funny because it's come through clients. So I happen to have two clients currently who are both working with that symbol, which is not that uncommon to have two people at the same time working with the same symbol. I don't know why that happens, but they're like, it's like these people are clustering up. They don't know each other, completely different ends of the earth, and yet they're working with the same thing. And one of the guys has some really his sort of his take on the symbol is that it's representative of paradox, of like how two things that seemingly opposite flow into each other, and how at the end of any one thing you end up in the other thing, and you're circling around. Yeah, which I thought was really interesting. And like, I mean, and that's, you know, in the Thoth they've got the yin yang, which is kind of that same idea, that same message. I've been thinking a lot about Mobius strips. You know, when you take a strip of paper and you fold it over once and tape it back together, so it's like a one-sided object, weird mathematical object. And I don't know. And I've been thinking about Ian McGilchrist's work and the idea of like going from the detail to the whole, and this dance that the left and right brain do. The left and right hemisphere of the brain do. That seems important to me in the symbol, and the way, like, his idea, I think, is that ideas originate in the right brain, and then they are kind of like processed through the left into language, and then they come back into the right for integration. And then obviously that's an infinite loop, because they're going to come back through and you're going to try and talk about them, and they go back through. And I've been thinking about that, and about how I was like, oh, I don't think I've had any thoughts about this, but as soon as I start talking, of course, I can't stop. Yeah, I've been thinking about that, about how you express yourself to people, and then you go back and do more thinking, and then express yourself again in that kind of loop between self and other, and how weird that is, and how magical that is, and how that's part of like the becoming process. That has to happen between, it happens inside you, left and right brain, doop de doop, and then it happens between you and other people as well. So it's like fractal, man.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because Bonnie was recently talking about that kind of left brain, right brain hemisphere thing. And she's a contrarian, and she was trying to presence more of this notion that, there's the split, but there's not necessarily a symmetry there, that is actually asymmetrical, in the sense that the left brain is more aware of itself than the right brain. So there's like, or maybe it's the opposite, but one hemisphere has more awareness of its existence. And so that there's, you can't say that they're like equal. There's equanimity there, or some symmetry there, which I thought was pretty interesting, because, as you're speaking and talking about that loop between self and other, or self and world, in some ways there isn't asymmetry there, because coherence can always be kind of found here. Like if you start with self, and you start with aligning your disposition, tapping into your body, there's like almost a greater capacity there than to affect the world around you. in this way. So so it's just interesting to think about this loop and think about a possibility of kind of an asymmetry there.
The title of the McIlchrist book is The Master and His Emissary. So I guess that's kind of suggesting that there's a asymmetry, although I think the master is the right brain.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, and then the left brain is the servant. So it's just like the clever monkey who puts things into language, whereas the right brain is like where all the juice comes from. That's what's hooked up to the whatever, to the divine, to that which shall not be named, to the mystery.
Well, I can tackle the astrology of the Thoth card. It's Jupiter in Capricorn, and so this is a lot about expansion and contraction, and so that's the gestalt and the features, and this that you're talking about, the details and the bigger picture. And also like the vibe of Jupiter versus the vibe of Capricorn. They're both about abundance. Capricorn is the queen of abundance. And because that's the earth goddess's temple. That's the feminine iteration of Saturn. So there's abundance there, but it's still constricted. There's something, because there's a lot of hard work and devotion and dedication that one has to put into the harvest. So that it's a lot about responsibility, austere, like hard work, but there's that payoff in the end, where Jupiter is all about giving it out. Jupiter, Zeus, is very just like giving. He's willing to give. And so Jupiter has this this feeling of abundance and expansion. It's the gaseous giant in the solar system, so it's got that image of like our protector, our defender. It's sending off asteroids into the space. So there's a lot there. And then there's something about like philosophy with Jupiter too, and the expansion of the mind, how we expand in the world in other ways other than like through physical means. So it's how do we expand in the mind? How do we expand into foreign countries and like understanding? See, I told you this is a problem. She wants to expand into my lap. But yeah, so that's Jupiter versus Capricorn is expansion and contraction. So that theme is there too, in that and I'm sensing it in the fact that we just had the first freeze, and so everything outside, everything Capricorn just died. All that earth stuff is dead now, but there's abundance that's coming from that. But and then there's that like grief that I have, like I mourned the loss of all those plants that were providing for us all fall. And so yeah, I sense it in like feelings too, is like sadness versus like, oh, this feels great, and I'm wanting to like explore this way. So change, as the card is called in the Thoth deck.
I was thinking about that thing, a friend said it to me, and he said it in jest. I don't know what I'd done. I'd just done something terrible, as I'm frequently doing. And he just said to me, never change. I was just like, fuck you. But I thought it's such a funny thing. Like, it's a funny thing that we say to each other sometimes, usually like in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, but still like that when someone's done something that's so them and you say, never change, like the way you are is just, and how that's kind of a curse, because like we need to constantly be changing, we need to constantly be flowing around that loop, going back within, coming back out, expanding, contracting. And if we did never change, we'd be in serious trouble. Well, we'd be dead.
I just started following Jordan Peterson on Telegram again, because I stopped following him everywhere like a certain time ago. And he just posted, I don't tell people they're okay the way they are. No, I say you could be way more than you are. Hence, do change. Just before we started our call, somehow coming back to what Sarah was speaking, I felt incredibly sad. And I wasn't sure if it's because, well, Rebecca will be working very hard for the next 6 weeks plus. But I was thinking of, I think now, Sarah, you put it in context for me, I was having this Capricorn feeling because I was thinking of, in a sense, I'm doing what I try to flee from when I fled from Christianity, which is investing really hard in something that I'm not sure that there's going to be real payoffs. Like Christian people, everything they do is for the next world.
Mm.
And I'm not sure that what I'm doing will actually bear fruit. And that makes me sad. So I had a very much a Capricornio, as you then explained it. I felt that just before the call very strongly.
I know that feeling.
Me too. Yeah, I know that feeling really well. And I know when your heart gets broken because it doesn't pay off and nothing that you expected to work out did work out. And from that, even that dark, ugly, terrible, bottom of the barrel place, you find something. And that all those experiences that you had in that give you these, like, this guy, ha ha ha, bucket. That's what, if the lower you can go in the sadness, the higher you're going to go up. So the balance is really important too, like coming back to that, like, I think that's kind of what I've been working the most at, is trying to temper my highs and lows to a more less of the duality of Jupiter and Capricorn. Because what I also like, there's giving is like being grateful, I think, is something that both Saturn and Jupiter can have us reflecting on. So even if it's like, oh, here's something I heard yesterday that's great. Justice is a reward, not a retribution. That's from Richard Red. And so, yeah, I've been really like, what I've been really sitting with and feeling through is being served a platter of something I wasn't expecting. And it's not even bad. Like, at first I was like, this is shit, send it back. This is not what was on the menu. This is not what I ordered. I was spending a lot of money. And so I didn't send the platter back. I just sat with it and I looked at it. And I'm not saying like I'm like super happy about the meal but I know that there's another one after that and another one after that. And so, yeah, like, even though there was a lot of investment in a couple of things that I wanted to do over the past couple of years, that all that I put into that I wanted, I didn't get the payout for it. And I can't, like, I'm not going to be, that's my reward, is that it's still in the bank, that I didn't use that withdrawal yet.
That's super interesting, that word justice, because it was a huge word for me yesterday. I was on a call that was looking at justice from like an animate perspective. And the guy was talking about in Greek times that the goddess of justice is Nemesis, and sort of talking about how like more of that causal, although I think it's ultimately acausal, but you get what you need, like that your nemesis isn't actually so much your enemy. It's just this, like, it's this way of balancing the forces. And that quote from Martin Luther King was coming up of the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And sort of this idea that, matter can't be created or destroyed. It's just distributed, it's just distributed, and really tending to this maxim of, you reap what you sow. So like you're saying, you put something out there and it bears fruit or it doesn't. But if it doesn't bear fruit, it's still going back into the earth. It's still something is participating in its existence in that form, in that structure. So also looking at justice, and Richard Rudd talks about justice as this interplay between structure, form, and magic. And that structure and form inherently is going to die and crumble. That's its job. But there's magic in every form and structure. And when that structure dies, and that magic will go and distribute in other forms. There's a dead boar, out close by. And then I've been meditating on it daily watching it decay. Thousands of maggots just disclosing this beautiful lace of skin and these odors, and I refuse to turn away from it. It's like the smells are sulfur infused, and these creatures who are just like this orgy of like activity between thousands and thousands of little creatures that are turning into flies. And then this epic battle turned into the maggots were falling out of the guts of the pig, like in cascades. And then the ants were coming and they were feeding on the maggots and dragging them under the ground, which was just a layer of sludge, which was decomposed maggots. So like the maggots are getting pulled under their ancestors' carcasses, basically. And it's like, man, nothing's wasted. Like nothing is wasted. And that's sort of, it was a sort of a beautiful example of justice in some ways of the pig's life was, you know, it was shot, it was hunted, it was killed, but its life is creating so much more life. And it's impossible for me to see a fly and not now see a boar inside, you know, like that's a boar transformed, you know? I don't know. I don't know if anything really gets wasted per se. I think it somehow, at least pieces of it get returned or yeah, it's
Yeah, I had a similar thought when Lizelle said that. It's funny that you bring out flies and maggots because I think I listened to like an entomologist talk about flies the other day on a podcast, and she was like, you know, we only look at fucking butterflies, but actually flies also have metamorphosis. There's like all these other insects, and I don't know why. She's like, you know, flies are the dumbest out of all the insects, by the way. She was like so excited to talk about maggots and flies. She was like, they are the ones that are gonna save us from the zombies, because when we get a zombie apocalypse, they're gonna eat all the decomposing flesh. So the flies are gonna be the ones that save us from the zombies. I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I also have that feeling of, oh, it brings up two things. And same with the plate analogy, like maybe that plate is shit. Who is it shit to? That's an interesting question. Is it shit to your ego and the expectations you had? Is it shit to the person who built that plan? But is it really shit to the person who made it in the kitchen, or the maggots that are gonna eat it when it starts decomposing in the back after someone turns it back into the kitchen? So I think that also relates to the same thing about fruit. If something is not fruitful, who is it not fruitful for, really? That's one question. But the other thing I've been thinking of that I've been, I guess, feeling a lot, because these days for me it's all about transition and like the recognizing like what it means to be ready to move on, what it means to have stayed somewhere more than necessary. So I do think there's this thing of like, and that has starting to feel to me like like the ultimate crime. I don't know why, but like prolonging something more than necessary out of denial. Because I do think eventually nothing goes to waste, but I do think we can withhold change, and there's something there that that creates a lot of misery. It's what I'm sensing, and I've noticed it at different levels, like in my own personal stuff, but even like when I read about things that are happening on a bigger global scale, and someone could say like, oh, but you know, this could have been avoided if this and this and this happened, or this could have ended months earlier if X and Y person or X and Y entity had done this. And like that gives me such a profound rage, because I'm like, so this doesn't need to be as extended and as miserable as it is. It could have ended earlier. So yeah. So I think I think eventually nothing goes to waste, but I do think in our own attempt to control things, we can prolong things more than necessary, and that there's a lot of, I guess, suffering entangled in that, is what I would guess.
So many thoughts came up for me. Like, one of the things was when you said flies are going to save us from the zombie apocalypse, I had to think, of course, of John and Chris's book that compares the meaning crisis to the zombie apocalypse.
Oh yeah.
So what is the flies then that's going to save us from this crisis? And the other thing, which maybe is linked with it, is like when you talked about protecting something, I had this image of trying to embalm the boar, the wild boar, so that it doesn't go to waste. But then there's no new life coming from it. So what is it that we're trying to preserve to the detriment of, and just making the meaning crisis worse, for instance, instead of just letting the flies come and be the new life?
I want to say appearances. I'm just thinking, I read a book a little while ago about the history of the mortuary industry and when they started doing embalmings and stuff. And I think I seem to remember it was during the American Civil War, maybe. It was a really good book, but it was a long time ago. People's sons were coming home dead, and there was a long period of time between their death and when they get the chance to have a funeral, if they even did. And so they started preserving the bodies so that they could keep them, so that the family could say goodbye to something that looked like their son. And then this book is written by an American mortician. And the practice, it's very, very popular in America to embalm bodies. It's really not here. I've never seen it done here, and people I've known who died. But it's a big deal over in America. And it seems to me like that's a really noble goal, I guess, to allow the family to have their final goodbye. But it's also something about like denial. Like, I want to see this person as if they're alive, as if they've just gone to sleep, which makes me think of, there are so many gravestones around here that say just sleeping or not gone, only sleeping. And I just think that's so funny because it's like they were just sleeping. You put them in a box and put them in the ground. It's harsh. But it's the same thing. It's like a denial. And I guess it goes with the kind of Christian thing that they'll all be woken up at Judgment Day or whatever.
But it's not just Christian, because embalming goes back to the pyramids. So what is that?
Yeah.
Like, why? Because that's like, I was thinking of taxidermy this whole time where you were talking about morticians, obviously. And I was like, I imagine they probably got a lot of ideas from taxidermy as to how, but then I thought, no, because Egypt was already embalming people too. So
But also animals. Egypt was big on taxidermy.
Right, exactly. And so because, well, during the scientific revolution was when they really figured out how to kind of make them look at least somewhat real, or at least to their how they thought they should look. I don't know if you've ever seen Leo the Lion.
Yeah. Oh my God, Sarah, you'd love it. Some of the museums in the UK have things that are stuffed by people who never saw the original animal at all. And they have like, animals that are supposed to be all like, their skin's supposed to be loose, but they've just filled them up. Like, I think there's a hippo that I saw that's just like.
I heard that about what is it, a walrus? Because walrus have all these rolls of fat, and then the first time they got this like walrus skin, they had no idea that it was supposed to have all these folds of fat, so they filled it up to like make and it's like a walrus balloon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so gross, but so hilarious.
Well, what they were trying to preserve, just to go back, something that I don't necessarily like we don't have like a giant taxidermist or mortician to like construct what the zombie apocalypse and how that relates, but I'm like, I like this thought experiment. So what I just wanted to like throw in is that for the purposes of preserving animals and making them look anatomically real was to share how amazing the world outside was. Like, this whole big world has all these things in it, and like, look at them. And also for the purposes of continuing natural history log from there, the things that are like accessible. It's amazing. I just like, because I'm also thinking of like these major scientific programs in history. There's a 700-year log of astrological data from Babylonian times. They were just like, all right, your job is to go out there every day and to look at the sky and just log it. And they continued to do that for 700 years. Cathedrals took so long to build at one time. I just want to mention that, and it's been coming up for me a lot, the Three of Pentacles is the next card, and that's about your mastery and, you know, building that cathedral and like taking on mentorship and that kind of thing. So I don't know, that connection is definitely there. It's in the cards. It's 2 to 3 of Pentacles. And so that's kind of, like, I don't know why my mind just went there, but it's still on track with where we've been going. And so I think that that's kind of where I'm going to leave it and just see what that brought up.
Well, I can pick up the cathedral idea, although I also have a taxidermy idea. That whole feeling that what we invest is not necessarily bearing fruit. It's because we're thinking short term. We're thinking building something in a day. We're not thinking building cathedrals. Just that. And then the other thing, what I was thinking is the problem comes when people who haven't seen or experienced the real thing tries to reconstruct the animal.
It makes me think of people who, and I've certainly been this person many times, who've only really approached something intellectually and not had the experience, and who are talking about it, and how many of those people I encounter. Yeah, it's really like the guy who's an expert on walruses. Don't worry, I'll stuff your walrus. Like, are getting looking just how I imagine a walrus looks. But it's kind of like it's slightly intangible and not necessarily immediately noticeable, because you can be very erudite and like know a lot of details about the mental model you have of something, and it can be fascinating in itself. That model can be a fascinating, beautiful object that you're familiar with and you have expertise in, but at some point it's just drifted away from reality. Maybe that's another two things that are our mental model of the universe, the actual universe, that are feeding each other. Anyway, it actually makes me think as well, not that I'm particularly knowledgeable about philosophy or anything, but it does make me think about a lot of sort of philosophy that I don't like, that seems very heady and not very embodied.
I mean, that's another duality, is mind and body, that we keep referencing too. So that's a juggle.
Bit of a different image, but I gotta say, because whenever I see cathedral as a symbology, this is the first thing that comes up. Something I learned in architecture school. So we were learning about like art history, and then there's the whole like Bauhaus school. Their funding like manifesto is the symbol of a cathedral, because it's like after, I don't know, this was what, early 20th century, and it's them going back to say like we need to recover craft, like we need to recover, like after going through this era of like ultra modernism and things being like super like deprived, or like art being seen as this thing that is like separated from building and architecture. These guys were saying like no, like everything, like sculpture and painting and all these things need to work together to make a building. Like the building itself has to be an expression of art, not a container where you expose art, kind of thing. And the main symbol they used to represent this is a cathedral, because they said that that's where cathedrals were. It was like the encounter of all the artisans, like the encounter of all the artists, of all the experts from different fields, like through their craft creating this thing. So I guess that to me also parallels a little bit with embodiment. It's like the difference between something that is there for like exhibition or versus something that emerges as the result of a creative practice. So yeah, that's the image that cathedral always has for me.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like with Lazelle's question about why, what are we holding on to? Why can't, what are we preventing the flies from just doing their thing? And part of it feels like just being so like tied and like deeply attached to our forms and our bodies, that our structures, that aren't meant to actually, they're meant to transform. So, I mean, it's hard to say I'm going to let go of this thing, like, I don't know if I can be a fly. Of course I can, because I don't have to worry about that. But it's, for me, it's always been an incredible tension. I've hated my body for most of my life, and yet I don't want to. It's like I have hated it. I wanted to escape it for a lot of my life, and I also don't want. I'm terrified to lose it, or for it to change. Because I don't know what the next form is gonna feel like, or I've gotten used to this little vehicle, So there's the other thing that was arising, especially when Isa was speaking. It's like time being another element here of wind structures are meant to sort of crumble and transform, and then interfering kind of with a more natural tempo or rhythm. Noticing too with the boar that temperature has an effect on the decaying process. So again, and then back to the etymology there, tempo, rhythm. So there's something too about temperature creating more maybe inertia or with the rhythm of decay.
I don't know at all that this is true, but I was thinking that if change is something that, let's say, requires an observer, so you as an observer will see that this thing goes from state A to state B. In order for you to be able to see yourself going from human to fly, then you would need to step out of yourself, right? Like, kind of not have this observer, but something outside. And maybe that might be the way that you can see yourself turning into a fly and still recognize that it's the same thing moving.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it might not be possible to do from this individual perspective, is what came up for me.
Kind of want to ask about this crown that this snake on the Thoth card is wearing. Yeah, good. There you go.
Here it is. His head.
Is he eating his tail or no?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, changing of the guards is always something there with that relationship of Saturn and Uranus, and just like Capricorn and Aquarius. So I don't know if that's why, but I just like noticed it, and it reminded me of that from Robin Hood, the animated movie.
They're his. I fucking love Sir His.
Snakes played that role in a lot of myths, right? Of like luring the people. But I heard a different interpretation of, it was actually a Luciferian interpretation of that myth of Adam and Eve in the garden, where Adam is the bad guy, I think. Eve's the good guy, and the snake lures her out of the cage that she's been confined into. So anyway, but yeah, snakes have that little like plot twist kind of thing about them too. So
Yeah, well, I think when Crowley commissioned this art, I mean, like, Crowley is not a Luciferian by any means, but he was all about flipping Bible stories and reading the good guys as the bad guys, etc. And I wouldn't have been surprised if he, I don't know, but I like the fact that the snake offers knowledge. I think Crowley would have subscribed to the knowledge is power perspective. Where I see when I see that little crown on his head is the king is dead, long live the king. Like you're saying, the change of guards, and like that thing of like just thinking of those previous iterations of self that are dead and gone, and you're this new person, like every morning, every every minute, like every breath, like, oh, here I am again, I'm this. And how strange to see those like I imagine them like paper dolls, you know, just falling away behind me, this like cutout of all the previous me's.
Mm.
And again, that thing of like wanting to hang on to the one that's right there instead of shedding your skin and finding the next one, mixing my metaphors now.
But wouldn't the crown then be the snake in its totality, be the eternal, that which stays unchanging, that which the real behind the change?
Maybe, or maybe the real is the pattern, not
Yeah, the
like,
yin
yeah,
yang.
yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, like the thing that lives outside the cave.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I saw that crown, I immediately thought of the wheel, like the Wheel of Fortune, and the crown at the top, and the wheel, and the king in those days having intentional rituals where they had the fall of the king. That you know, and it's similar to the boar. That which is first shall be last, and that's what last shall be first. Right? There's that. I think that's a Bible verse, right? So the boar is the king, the Lord, right? It's a strong, powerful thing, and then it turns into a tiny little fly, a little maggot, you know. So that reminder of, you know, engendering humility of both we're bright and king in the sun, and we're also, you know, don't get too attached to that form, because guess what, you're changing. So.
It is kind of funny when you use that lingo because I am a taxidermist daughter, and when you get attached to a form, it's like a mannequin. That's what you attach the skin to. So when you like the way it's just like flowing in and out of jargon is really funny too. Sorry.
And I was, when you were speaking earlier, Ollie, I was thinking, I don't want you to become a fly yet. I'm quite attached to you. So also that attached came up for me as well. And it's, yeah. So I guess it's also about really celebrating the form that we are in while we're in it.
Yeah, while we're in it is important because I was going to presence that you don't want like a mannequin of Holly in your apartment.
No,
Like it would be
no.
creepy. And that's what we
I
all
love you,
know.
Ollie, but no.
I know. But that is an interesting thing, how we know that there's a certain amount of time that we can hold on to something and when it's not appropriate to hold on to it any longer. It was like a Black Mirror episode where this person had their significant other reconstructed. I don't remember if it was like using their actual
It's like
or an AI.
text bot. Yeah.
Something
I
like
remember that episode. That was amazing. Yeah, and he was texting with his dead wife or something.
yeah. So there's a lot of like creepy things, or even our memories. There was one where they were like recording their memories and then the person could go back through them. That like all of this stuff is kind of haunting, that we can, I mean, that people can dig up your tweets from 10 years ago and use that against you. Like this, the interesting thing about this balance thing and this juggler and this idea of keeping like the change is always happening is like there are so many iterations of us that we no longer identify with. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just like, this card has a lot more depth to it than at face value.
Yeah, that makes me think of the Australian Aborigines who won't look at photographs of dead people, and they won't put the like if they have them on the news in Australia, they will like have a warning like we're going to be showing images which will have dead people in them. So if you don't want to see them, don't look at them. There's something very, and it makes me think of you saying it's creepy, you know, looking back through memories or to like the Black Mirror episode. It seems creepy to us, but to them, photos seem creepy. So like, is it just like, and where does the creepiness start? Because when I start thinking, I was talking to a friend the other day about porn, and he was talking about the possibility of having porn that you could go in VR, so you could like get around this side of the bed and have a closer look at this angle or whatever. And I was like, that sounds immensely creepy to me. Like, and he was like, it's no creepier than watching it on a flat screen. Why is it creepier that it's 3D? But to me, it really felt much, much creepier. And I think that, I don't know, I think maybe we're talking about something that's like an uncanniness that started the moment we started putting, maybe it's like the genesis of language, when we started taking this and putting it into words. There's something creepy about that. We're like creating a copy of our own consciousness in words. Like the first time someone did that to another person at the campfire, they're probably like, what the fuck are you doing, you weirdo? I don't know. Yeah, there's some, and that makes me see something like those two discs on the Thoth card just going further and further apart, and the tension stretching between the two. I don't know. If I think about it too long, I end up not being able to watch movies because I find them creepy that I'm looking at past Jude Law.
Well, what came up was Eurydice and Orpheus, that myth of like, don't turn around. You know, there's some, and that's present in actually quite a few kind of like, don't look back. You know, that there's something important about letting the dead, or letting what has been pruned to
Yeah.
rest and decay.
Because why, Rebecca, when you were talking about like this whole thing of embalming, because people wanted to have like a final thing, it really, like, I've been having this feeling come up quite a few times recently, where it's like, is there ever such a thing as a good final thing? Like, let me do this thing one last time. Like, let me this thing one last time. Like, when we go to this place, like, because I think I've been like having that a lot, because I'm having a lot of final things in the next weeks and in the past months, and it is weird. Like, there's a part of it that never feels true. Like,
Mhm.
it's not a real resolution. It's something else. And yeah, and then it also, I guess, me maybe me again going like, how big or how small do I go into this? Like, is it my final time that I take a breath in this corner of this room while the thing is in this condition? Like, like, how many final things are you gonna have? So it is a weird. The more I think about it, the more uncomfortable I feel as well with those kind of ways of framing things. Of like, oh, this is my final dinner with this person, or my final thing, or my final time that I do this thing. There's something about it that feels off. And the
It's
other
like
thing,
you're trying to embalm the moment.
kinda, yeah, exactly. It's like trying to involve the moment. And the other thing, I don't know if I'll be able to put this into words, but I think there's something there. Because I remember hearing once in a podcast, and that somehow resonated for me as well, was someone talking about how, like, so many of the attachment issues that we might have, and the reason we try to hold on to things, or we end up repeating like negative patterns, is because we're trying to recreate an experience. And this person was kind of arguing that the reason we're trying to do that is because we don't have a real memory of it. And by memory, he meant like not a record in your head, but like you didn't access that experience through the eternal. I think that's what he meant, is like, if you have lived that moment in a way that felt eternal, and you have access to that, then there's really no need to relive it, because you know, first of all, that you cannot, that every time you think about it is going to be different. But second, there's also kind of no urge to do that either, because that moment in itself, because it was eternal, is enough. And you don't need to try to preserve it, or embalm it, or repeat it, or whatever it is. And I guess he was trying to argue how a lot of compulsions and other things can come from that idea of trying to repeat something that you didn't get to preserve. But he was trying to argue like, there's no such thing as preserving in the sense of keeping a perfect record of it. The actual preserving is having been able to access it or engage with it through the eternal. So, and that is kind of coming up for me, because we're talking about the eternal as the background of everything too, and like how that might link to preserving and memory and all these things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I just like a slightly different take on that is that also trauma or PTSD, those kinds of things, are actually like an embalmment of a specific situation or event, right? So it doesn't change. Like you go back and you're like, you relive this thing that is dead, but you've embalmed it, and it has absolutely you can't take a different perspective of it, or you can't walk around it, or stretch it into that more eternal, or just seeing things from various perspectives, so it then becomes involved, calcified, and hardened. So sort of, I like looking the way you were saying it in this other way too.
Yeah, maybe that's what part of the creepiness of recorded media is, that when that's not how we're supposed to experience the world. We're supposed to experience the world like here, like in the eternal present moment, and also through memory, but memory is obviously constantly changing because every time we access it, it changes. What we have, when I put on my favorite Jude Law movie, and he's exactly the same, his hair hasn't grown, he's exactly the same as he was last time I watched it 2 weeks ago. Like, there's something weird about that. I'm doing something perverted. Like, that's not how we're supposed to. I mean, I am also doing something perverted whilst I watch, but like the act of watching it is in itself a perversion of the way that we should interact with reality.
But aren't there things
So-
worth remembering? Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Holly.
No, just sort of that, again, like this tension that we're playing with of like preservation versus decaying things. But then there's also this important of remembering, we talk a lot of remembering the wheel, remembering. So where is that line of preservation, of remembering what's right and what's good, and what's, what patterns that are functional, versus letting things that, need to move on.
Mm.
I think my question is the same. Like, how do we have a living relationship with the past?
Mm. I think it's funny you bring up the wheel, because like the beauty of those seasonal festivals is that we can be doing the same or similar rituals every year for every year of our lives, repeating those same 8 things, and they have a beautiful familiarity, and yet every single time it's different, and we're in full engagement with them. And there's a deepening that happens over time, so it's not the same. But it has the same structure. It's like, I guess that's the balance of structure and anti-structure, or whatever, however you want to think of it. It's like,
No, I was gonna say, like, to me, what I get when I try to think of like why remembering the wheel feels different is that it feels more about remembering process. Like, it's remembering something that is moving. It's not remembering a fixed image. And in that sense, it's not even remembering through memory, is remembering by being, right? Is remembering
yes.
through enacting something, which is a bit different than remembering by trying to summon an image or summon a story, or summon some, yeah, like a discrete thing. That would be my intuition.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say. That's what I was trying to get at.
That's astrology too. Like you were talking about, like, how do we feel the past, how can we live the past? And there are, like, when I look at these images of these planets and these zodiacal signs and things like that, I feel something. So when somebody tells me in 1888 Pluto was in wherever, I'm like, whoa, okay, I can kind of get an understanding of what that kind of felt like. I don't know, but my cells do, my body does. Something in here, maybe the people, maybe the plants, maybe the whatever has. And another thing I wanted to mention, that DNA, that double helix is in that kind of, it looks almost like the infinity sign if you just like took a little chunk of it. So all of that DNA is informing my DNA. And yeah, I've lived those lives too, and somehow I can feel those feelings. And so it's like a universal wheel, sized wheel, where the universe had this story that it was kind of telling, and people tried to capture it in these images. And I just feel like the further back that you can go in dated history and see those kinds of things, the I don't know, the more cryptic the message gets, but then the more that it takes to get there. So the more that it takes for me to understand what they were trying to say, the more I understand something bigger, something transcendent of both of our understandings, I guess. I hope, anyway.
So how do we process things that have ended in a healthy way?
Cry.
I have this tendency to then start writing about it. But now I'm feeling, isn't that embalming?
I guess it depends how you write.
Yeah.
Because if you write one day and then you're happy to contradict yourself the next day, there's a life to it, there's a movement to it. But if you write, this is how it was, full stop, I'm never going to look at this again from any other angle, that's more like embalming. If writing's just an act of like working through your thoughts about something, that feels more healthy to me. It's kind of like the Jungian thing of circumambulating. You have to allow yourself to circumambulate it. You can't just stare at it from the one angle. And then as you move around, it changes, and you end up remembering, like, say, a friendship that you lost, for example, that seemed like such a tragedy at the time, and now you can acknowledge the sweetness of that person being in your life, even though they're not any longer. Like, the friendship has kind of changed because you've changed the way you think about it in your memory, and the only place it exists now is in your memory. So you have to allow that change to happen instead of, you know, how people get hung up on, and again, I certainly have been hung up on, you know, something like that went wrong in my childhood and been like, this is what happened and this is why I'm like this based on this thing. And that's like useful to think about, but then you have to let it go and see it from another angle and think, well, maybe it didn't happen like that, or maybe it didn't affect me that way, and allow that to be able to change and shift. And it was so like, I don't know, I feel like we're really encouraged to like make a timeline of ourselves and be like, I was this person, then I was this person, and show all the like things, and then laminate that and show it to everyone. And it's just, yeah. So I think what I'm saying is that never change advice is terrible advice to your present self, but it's also terrible advice to the way you conceptualize yourself in the past. Like, it's just terrible advice all around.
Because when I say I write, I mean I also make everyone and everything into a story. So then it is kind of like embalmment. But now I'm thinking every time something changes in my life, it is as if I start rewriting the whole story. Because you see everything in a different light. Like, oh, that thing that happens, I speak now of it as an initiation, for instance. But when it happened, I didn't see it as that. So you're constantly rewriting your past, indeed. And that's how you have a living relationship with who you were. And maybe that's how you then have a living relationship with who you become.
Exactly. Yep. Your past informs your future. That's where we learn, is by reflecting on our past. You know, we look at the patterns, we look at it from many different angles, and then we can make more informed choices that bring our future self life. You know, I'm gonna make this go. This needs to go extinct. This pattern is no longer so functional or so beautiful, because I've looked at it. You know.
Well, it reminds me of that I mentioned a bit in the chat before, and it's been coming up for me a lot, is the whole thing of regret again, right? It's like this acceptance of all those alternate versions of you that didn't happen, all those alternate choices that you didn't take, instead of being like, no, that didn't exist. It's more like, yeah, that did exist as a potential seed somewhere, and for whatever reason I didn't follow through. And I think I've been learning to recognize regret as a way to relate to past as well. Not with shame, but with a bit more responsibility, I think. And a bit of even more recognition of my own power to make things follow certain path or certain course.
Would we recognize moments that will cause regret now, though? Do we ever learn that?
I think it's like one of those things where, you know how the odds of you finding the right thing are increased by your willingness to search in several search spaces. It's kind of one of those things where it's not, I don't know, like the more times we fail, the more fodder there is for something to ignite. So it feels like collecting those kinds of moments where like it felt like a lot was invested into something that maybe didn't happen. I don't know. I mean, it's every full moon. Like we go through that. We all go through that. It's not anything. It's just a normal part of life. But yeah, I don't know.
I think it's an invitation to self-love, because for greater self-love, deepening the capacity for self-love, because you can look back and look at the places and moments of regret, and then that is an opening and an invitation for us to hold ourselves in that, and have empathy and compassion and understanding. And for me, that's the hardest, that can be the hardest person, entity to have compassion for, is myself. And so that regret actually for me is a pilgrimage towards loving myself more deeply.
Yeah, and also being able to like see it in other, like see a situation in other where they're like putting in a lot of effort for something, and you're like, I don't want to see you hurt. I don't want to see you struggling, but I know that this is actually a big payoff. Like there's something in here, and like, yeah, I don't know why that gives you that ability to reflect on your own regret, gives you the ability to see somebody else and what they can glean from that, like all the experience that they can get from that, and being like, it's not mine to fight, it's theirs to fight. And if seeing, like, even in situations where I do feel like I have regret of the way that I handled something, I still see that it gave me a lot of power in those instances where I was willing to face whatever it was that's regrettable at this stage of my life, that I'll look at 10 years from now and be like, I didn't regret that at all. So that's the thing, is like you get to 80 and you're like, no regrets. But all of these stages in between, you're like, oh, fuck that stage. And then, but then you look back at 15, you're like, oh, that wasn't so regrettable. Like it wasn't like so bad that I wore pink on Thursday instead of Wednesday or whatever, you know? But it feels so much more intense. You
didn't though, did you? Wear pink on Thursday? Sarah, we've spoken about this.
After the fact.
The other thing that's coming up as you speak of that is like patience too, because when we can look back at our own journey, and like, I know for me, I'm seeing it's so easy to like see other people in their journey and be like, come on, like get going, like wake the fuck up, you know? But then I look back and I go, oh, it's taken me a long ass time, really long time to get where I am. And not that I'm, not that I'm anywhere, but it's just a deep reminder too of timing, change, and then patience being so critical to our relationship, both with ourselves and with others.
I was just thinking when Lizelle says you don't you don't recognize the regret in the moment or something like that, and I was thinking how often I actually do. I think I'm going to regret this, and then I do it.
So we love you.
There's some
Well,
kind of
something-
momentum,
Yeah.
and I just give into it,
Yeah.
even though I know, like, yeah, in a day or an hour or 5 minutes, I'm gonna regret giving in. And like, there's a real beauty in that release of like, it's the fuck it energy, right?
That's what I mean. Like, I think sometimes you want to regret something, and there,
Mm.
you know that you're gonna learn something by regretting it, anyway. Or you just want to test yourself and see, like, can I forgive myself after I start regretting this? So I've also had that feeling too of like you said, like knowing that I'm totally gonna regret doing this, but I'm gonna do it anyways because sometimes you need that too.
It's such a quick transformation because you do it, it like releases the energy. Like
Yeah.
it's such a alchemical thing and it releases the energy really quickly, but then it gives you back this other energy that's like, for me at least, I notice it's like a more inertia. It's a much lower, it's like, oh fuck, like it stays with me longer than that burst, like that relief I get from doing the impulsive thing I want to do.
I want to look at the gentle tarot image
Sure.
because is she underwater? I was trying to figure that out.
No, she's on ground. Let's see, there we
I
go.
changed
I know
I
there's
thought I saw something that looked like a fishy.
Is that a
well,
bird?
there's birds and
Ah, I thought it was a shrimp. It's a bird.
little birds. Yeah, it does look like water, doesn't it?
And
It
the
could
little
be. I mean,
flowers,
she could
like,
be.
could be seaweedy type.
She literally.
Exactly. I thought it was seaweed and shrimp.
I like that.
That was like, oh, like water. Like,
No, it
it's
kind
like-
of does. I mean, like there's a rainbow reflected across her body. She could be underwater. I like this interpretation. But yeah, she looks quite at peace. The balls are just floating. She's not too worried. It doesn't seem like a struggle.
Yeah, if you compare it to the juggler, it's like her juggling is so much.
graceful.
I know, and the waves and the ship in the back really prepared.
But the hat, though. I mean, let's talk about
So
regrets. here.
phallic, isn't it?
That's exactly. The design of this card is regretful.
I have one just
Super.
like that.
The condom on his head. It's not subtle.
Oh, I should dress like the juggler for somehow.
Fondling some pentacles.
I wonder how long we've been using. I just because the Thoth has the yin yang symbol, and this is all kind of. I feel like this is all the same symbol, sort of telling the same story. The infinity symbol, the yin yang. They're probably loads from all different cultures. I'm just wondering how long humans have been trying to put this weird experience that we have of being these like creatures that split between two worlds into a symbol that looks something like this. Like it feels very ancient and primal and important. You can imagine people scratching out on the walls of caves and stuff, just like trying to say something about I'm this and I'm also this, and my job as a human is to navigate between these two poles, and it's really hard. But also like the easiest thing in the world, ironically.
I can't help thinking when I was in school, I never studied because I don't mind failing, but I mind failing if I actually tried. So, but I never failed because, yeah, school was easy. But so I do have a deep fear of trying and failing. And I keep thinking, and sorry for being so negative today, but I keep thinking, but there are millions of people who are deeply okay with doing nothing, just watching Netflix, and that's life. And because Holly, when you said, yeah, we need to be patient also with other people on the process, some people just don't want to change and then not even going to go onto the path of change. So that's not even being patient. That's just, you know, that's their choice. And I mean, part of me is incapable of giving up, I think, of not striving upward. But another part of me thinks, why bother?
Mm.
In the end, is there a difference between the person who does work? You know, Ollie, I'm looking at you and thinking of you. You're constantly talking of ancestral, like, incorporation and transformation through what we're doing. But it's like, you know, using paper straws while some people fly with their private jets all over the place constantly. It's that type of thing. Like, people keep trashing their ancestors, and you know, that the rune keeps piling up. So why bother fixing?
I got one. Because of all of the, like, it's not about the person that changes, it's about the ripple effect of that person. So take, for example, one person and think about that person is depressed, they're angry every time they go to work, everybody they interact with is there's a bad mood, they hate being there, then they leave work and they go home and they're by themselves and they just self-isolate, and just like every day is that. And everybody that interacts with this person is just like lowering the energy. And then that person has some sort of insight, something comes in, and then every day they go to work and they interact with everybody and they're like brightening people's day. And you just think of the ripple effect that that has, because John, that he went to work and scolded because John didn't do his work, well, then John goes home and beats his wife and his kids. But if John goes to work and his boss is in a good mood, John might take everybody out to dinner or whatever it is. You keep doing it because, like, you just know that every one person that you can touch in a good way, like those kinds of moments of God coming through you, that's the only way we can bring spirit here to this earthly realm. And so there isn't like a answer to that question, why bother, that is satisfying to somebody that doesn't want to change. For me, why bother is legacy, and like just knowing that like any little bit of trail magic that I can plant on this planet is worth it. And I don't even have to see the people smiling about it. If they can just come by and pick it up and experience that magic and like take that somewhere with them, like even just talking about it, I feel it's in me. So I have to share it.
And it's you. The boar becomes the fly. So like every interaction we have, we're actually having with our own self. And I think when we die, we don't escape it. It's not like my sense is Lisa's me, Sarah's me, Rebecca's me, Lizelle, you're me. And when I go, you're just a form of me in a different body, like born at a different time in a different body. So again, whatever I do to you, I do to myself. And if I haven't, and I also want to challenge the assertion that people don't change. Like, change is inevitable. We're all changing no matter what. It's evidenced by the fact that our forms die. Like, change is actually happening. And my experience has just been, you know, my mom, Puck, like, she sits around and she watches like murder porn all day and drinks wine by the bottles and Diet Coke like nonstop. And she's suffering. Like, she's really suffering. And I can't do the work that she needs to do to transform that. But I can change my relationship and attitude towards her, which in effect changes her. So when I'm with her and I'm more gentle and soft and open, something within her comes out that wouldn't if I were more closed down and rigid. So I think we do change others just by our presence and the kind of presence that we offer. And I want to offer the kind of presence that I want to receive, you know, because if you're me, I want to treat you. And sometimes that is that very harsh boundary, or that rigid boundary. If you see somebody hurting themselves really badly, you know, it's like seeing yourself hurt yourself. You don't feed it. You don't feed it. So it's not all just like, I'm going to accept everyone and take everyone in and exhaust my energy. Sometimes we have to let people learn how to stand on their own 2 feet and be there when they're ready to receive. Because I've needed to do that. I've needed people, we said this in the chat, sometimes the most compassionate thing someone has told me is no. And that in turn encouraged me, invited me to find the power within myself and my own strength, to go into nature, or to sit with that discomfort and learn from it. So versus someone rescuing me out of that, which I don't learn much from. So that's why it's worth it, I think, because we're not going to escape. We can't escape ourselves ultimately.
I think, like, yeah, you're both completely right, but that's not why I do it. I don't do it because of the ripple effect, and I don't do it because I see other people as aspects of me. I do it because I'm the kind of creature that does it. Like, that's it. I was thinking this the other day. I went out to pray in the morning before dawn. It's -7. And I'm like, why me? Why do I have to go out, and no one else has to go out and pray before dawn in -7? Why do I have to do it? And I'm like, oh yeah, because that's who I am. Like, and I think that's who you are, Lizelle, as well. I mean, in different ways, obviously, but there's something in you that is the sort of person who's going to be thinking these thoughts and working them through her life in all these ways. And, you know, we can think, oh, wouldn't it be easier to be a different sort of person? Or, you know, and all those sort of thoughts. But really, if we're like, I don't know, I feel like if you're honest with yourself, you're the sort of person who does the sort of thing you're doing. And that's like that's just something that we have to roll with, whether we're making the world a better place or not. This is who we are, and this is what we're doing. And like, I know, I just think that like, yeah, I don't feel like it's a choice. It's a fish swim, you know, because he's a fish.
And then it's also really not about reaping the rewards, because there is no, you sow, that's what you do. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, there is no final product, like or it doesn't matter if there is. Maybe there is, but it doesn't matter if there is, because you're going to be doing it anyway.
Yeah, so that, but I do feel like, because this is about balance, he's like juggling, so there is like that where I'm feeling the need to challenge this aesthetic, like, oh well, then I'm just sewing all the time and I don't get to enjoy life or experience, or like, oh, it's just all in service. And it's like, but we actually have to also, and this is a big crime that I commit in the garden all the time. I go to the community garden, I work, and I don't harvest a thing. I harvested a lot before this freeze, but I never harvest. And that's important. It's not just you taking. Things need that energy to grow. Other tomatoes want to grow on that vine. So if you don't pull those tomatoes off, then nothing else gets to grow. So yeah, something in that.
Tomato wants to be eaten, and it becomes you. Cool. You know, I want to become human. Or I want to become tomato, you know. It's like, it's a wonderful synergy, the exchange of energy that wants to happen.
Yeah, so people do change, even if they change into flies or into tomatoes. Like,
I just want to say, and hence you have to be patient, because some people are only gonna change by the time they get to change into flies.
yeah,
So
yeah, but like the fly might go on and blah blah blah, and eventually, you know, it become part of the body of the next Messiah, you know, like.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it also, again, is enough for me, and another important invitation. I keep saying that word. know myself more deeply, because again, if I do look at the world from that lens of everyone is just a reflection of me, then I have to look at how all the ways that I am my mother, and the way that I do drown myself in, those kinds of things, which then gives actual motivation of like, I don't want to, yeah, that's me. And I have a lot of compassion for that. I've been in those places where I felt so trapped, and I'm just constantly seeking comfort, something comfort me, something comfort me, something take me away from this pain, this dullness. Then I can respond to her more adequately, and then it motivates me too to like not reach for those things in a way. I just go, this is where it can go. I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to become a zombie. So it's kind of a win-win.
I think that's the real thing, is like, you don't want to be a zombie. So that's why. That's the big why. Because what else am I gonna do? This feels good. It feels good to like continue to like find Easter eggs in the world and just be like, it's telling me something. We must go. And then if you're wrong, like you show up and it's not the party you thought it was gonna be, you're like, oh well, that was interesting trying to get here, and there's like this whole thing that you had. But otherwise you would have just been sitting down watching Netflix, getting your high off somebody else getting murdered and then solving the mystery or not.
That's the thing. I think there's like you say like, oh well, why should I do anything? But the thing is that the zombie path doesn't seem exciting at all. Not once you realize what is there, which is very little. And in that sense, I do, just like with any transition, I don't think everything happens. I have a sense that some people will wake up and change eventually. Maybe if it's after they become flies a couple of times. I don't know. But yeah. So for whatever reason, I think all of us had something that kind of like clicked for us at some point, and we're like, aha, okay. and drew us to some path of like realizing, well, yeah, I don't have to do what everyone else is doing. Or things the way they are don't really make sense. And yeah, I guess it is a difficult position to navigate, because you see so much and you just want to be like, wake the fuck up, please. Especially with people you love, I think, and people that part of you is like, I have all the answers, but it doesn't matter if I give you all the answers, because they're my answers, not yours. And answers don't mean anything if you don't find them by yourself. So yeah, as long as I get to die and not be a zombie, I think I've done a good life.
That's I mean, it didn't occur to me for some reason when we first talked about zombies that they are attached here and stuck here, and that is the thing. Like, it occurred to me that they're dead and that they're walking around, and then that's like us on, our phones or anything that's completely distracting us from our awareness. But it didn't occur to me that it's the attachment that keeps them here. Not like they could choose to die. Maybe they could be like, hey, there's a human, let me run up on it. I don't want to eat you, but can you kill me? Suicide by a human.
Well, there's a belief in that mind culture, that these zombies, living zombies that we're talking about, are kind of like unmourned souls from the past. They're ancestors from the past who didn't get properly mourned or grieved, or developed, right? So they can't move to the next body. They can't move into the fly, because they haven't, and this is their belief, that they haven't fully taken on this form. They haven't actually fully taken on this form in order to graduate, to level up, to move on to the next one. And so they are lost, they're wayward. And so then they find the most tender and vulnerable and actually open person, usually within one's bloodline within the family. And that's often how they see people with addictions and zombie type behaviors, is it's not something's like they're bad or bad people. It's like, oh shit, like there's something here that didn't get developed and mourned or grieved properly, and now this person is taking on that pain. So it's a very different way of seeing addiction than we do in our society.
And if on top of that you add a bunch of systems that literally make profit out of everyone being a zombie,
Yes.
and it compounds and compounds into even more of a nightmare.
Totally. This is the whole Pluto moving into Aquarius, the AI and technology, the collective fear of what that, and virtual porn, you know, something. Is this going to unzombify or more zombies?
Well, I guess we'll see.
That's a very wise answer. It feels, I remember one time under one of John and Chris's videos, when they talked about the zombies, I wrote like, it's funny that you focus so much on the zombie and not about the human beings in the movies that actually find each other, because like this whole project of awakening from the mini crisis is that human beings finding each other amongst the zombies. And I'm really grateful for founding the four of you.
That's how it always goes in these zombie stories as well. I always think it's not technically a zombie story, but you know, Day of the Triffids, which is the same plot as 28 Days Later, like the really big zombie movie. Exactly the same plot. And when I came out of the cinema, I was outraged. I was like, they've just completely ripped off this book, but they've got zombies instead of plants. But like all the stories are the same. They're all like, you know, zombies take over, and then these disparate people from different parts of the world, different walks of life, are all forced together, and then they all like battle through and somehow make friendships and alliances and stuff. And then in the end, they all find a farmhouse somewhere far away from civilization and like build a little family there. And I used to like, I love that part of those stories, and I would look forward to it because it's always, they have beautiful shots of the countryside and that bit, don't they? And they had the little stone cottage, and maybe there's like a little wisp coming up, and it feels so homey and so precious. And this little family of people who have found each other just by luck and happenstance and can really trust each other because they've been through real shit with zombies together. I love that. Like as a teenager, I used to fantasize about the zombie apocalypse just so I'd have the chance to find my family.
And then 2020 happened.
I was gonna say, I was totally reflecting on that the other day. Of like, it's the zombies that brought them together, right? Because like COVID, remember how isolated and like so much despair there was. It was like, we're never gonna be able to see anybody ever again, and then technology starts to explode, and then that becomes the doorway through which we can. I'm like, I can have these beautiful. I found my zombie survivors, and like I'm never like it's amazing. It's like, thank you. So yeah, there's always that, right? Like it looked so despairing, and it was really painful, but then it like led to this greening, this like the desert greened, and here we are able to connect with spiritual kin that we wouldn't, if COVID hadn't happened, this wouldn't be here. So thanks, zombies. Thanks, zombie. That feels like maybe a good place for us to wrap things up. What do you think?
On thanks, zombies.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Zombies.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, please.
Because it's really in my mind now. It's a song or saying, if not for the grace of God, then it would have been me. And that's maybe a better way to look at it than why me? It's
And that part of you, I mean, this is what I realized the other day when I was like, things don't have to be so hard. And I was like sitting meditating, and was like, but I fucking love this. Like I love sitting in 7-degree weather. Like, who am I kidding? Come on. I actually love the hardship. I love the sweat. Like, stop pretending.
I love living.